You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Knezik.
Welcome back to a new rooted discussion episode of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Knezik, and welcome to episode 46 of the, I don't want to say the only podcast, maybe the only, not even only native plant podcast. We're the first podcast to say that you should spend all your stimulus money on native plants.
Yeah.
Well, I just got my check in the mail today, and we know where it's going to go. So you guys should do that too. You're helping the earth when you do it.
You don't get them for free.
I get some of them free. I got to pay for a decent amount.
You work in a native plant nursery. You're telling me you don't get
for more than you think.
Well, maybe I shouldn't tell you, but they let me have plants for free here. So
the first one's free to get you hooked, and then after that, you got to start paying for it. But today we really want to take a deep dive into native plant gardening. We know a lot of our listeners, and even the ones who are doing this for a living, also like to do this at home, and sometimes that can be a little more daunting. You have like a big project. Well, you have all these really smart people that are chipping in their ideas on it. And then when you get home and you try and do it on your own, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get started or find the right path for yourself. So, and while Fran and I work at a native plant nursery, and we both use native plants in our gardens at home, I would say we're still pretty novice when it comes to actually putting the right plants in the right spots and being good gardeners when it comes to native plants.
I'm novice, and I don't even listen to my own advice. You know, like we'll do all these episodes about what you should do, and I don't always follow my own advice. And it's, and sometimes working at a nursery or a native plant nursery, sometimes you go home and you want to break from it. Like you need to distance yourself and find another hobby rather than that. But I'd say I did start to enjoy gardening once I had kids, because that gave me some solitude and in my garden of loneliness, where you can just gather your thoughts and spend some time. And over time, I've learned to appreciate it, but I don't really have any pillar to like a starting point. Like I know I'm a novice and I would love to know more. So I'm really excited. My favorite episodes are ones where I learn something.
Yeah.
And I feel that's going to be this episode. So I have my learning cap, getting ready to put it on, and I'm ready.
Yeah, and that's why we decided to bring in some experts. Today we're joined by two returning guests and one new guest. Please welcome Richard Mccoy, Becky Leboy, and John McGee. That kind of rhymed, huh?
Yeah, so, I like that.
I'm just going to go in order of how I'm looking at you on my screen. Richard, why don't you give just a short introduction, and then Becky, you'll follow, and then John, you can go after that.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Fran. Becky and John, great to
Pam and Jim.
Yes, Pam and Tom. So I'm Richard Mccoy, owner of Richard Mccoy Horticultural Services. I started in the green industry back in the late 80s, early 90s as an arborist. Started my business around 1995, and then transitioned to organic and ecological in 2005. And we've been running our business that way ever since. We focus on native plants, green infrastructure, like I mentioned, organic turf care, and a pretty cool thing that just happened to us in February. We're actually New Jersey's first AGZA, the American Green Zone Alliance certified company, which means that they have gone over us with a fine-tooth comb, and we are the only company certified under AGZA to use battery-powered electric mowing and maintenance equipment. So that's pretty exciting for us. We also, with Pinelands, as Tom and Fran mentioned before, are part of New Jersey Sustainable Business Registry. I'm part of the Rutgers Organic Land Care Program, a board member of the Organic Landscape Association, and a few other odds and ends. But that's the quick and dirty of my background.
I'm just glad. I just want to butt in that I don't have to introduce myself.
Yeah.
Because everyone is involved in so much, and I just feel like such a slacker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. No, because the last episode you just listed all the things that you're a part of, and I'm like, oh.
Well, it's when you learn not to say no. That's how I'm a part of things. I don't say no.
I'm a little older, so I've learned to say no.
So Becky, now you sent me a whole bio, but now I flipped it back on you. You have to read your bio. I wasn't going to do the work. How about you introduce yourself?
Well, hello there, everyone. Thanks so much for having me back on the show. I'm so excited to be here again. My name is Becky Leboy. I'm the Education Outreach Specialist with Ocean County Soil Conservation District. And I wear a couple of hats because I also can't say no. And I am an adjunct professor at Kane University over at the Kane Ocean campus. I also wear a hat with Ocean County Parks and Recreation as a naturalist, and I predominantly lead tours for birding, and also a co-leader for the Jersey Shore chapter of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. And my hobbies or my passions include both native plants and birds. So I'm constantly outside getting ideas for my home garden.
You didn't even mention Jersey Friendly Yards.
Yeah, that's a huge initiative. Oh, I'll be talking a lot about that with my employer, Ocean County Soil Conservation District. I can launch into that now, or I can kind of weave it into our conversation. And I was actually on the podcast talking about it. There's a whole episode.
That was episode 5, and I'm actually Rick, I'm trying to figure out what episode you were on. This was me not doing my homework beforehand, but.
Yeah, how dare you?
Yeah.
Shame on you.
Yeah.
Shame on you.
So
not like I could have done.
Yeah, once I find it, I'll let everyone know what episode to listen to for that. And then our next guest, you might recognize the name, and you should definitely recognize the voice because he is a podcast host of his own. John, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm John McGee, and it was kind of fun listening to you say the only podcast on native plants, since I'm the host of the Native Plant Podcast.
Oh no, I wasn't trying to say the only podcast on native plants. I was saying the first one that was going to say you should spend your stimulus check on native plants.
There you go.
Yeah, you need to get more money.
I'm not getting a stimulus. I'm not getting a stimulus check, so I don't know what to do with $0, but I'm okay with that. I own McGee Design in Middleburg, Virginia, and we're an award-winning design firm. Do a lot of different things. I guess I'm hearing that you get to be a business owner and you get to be an expert because you don't know how to say no on things, and I guess I fall into that category too.
Well, thank you for not saying no to the podcast. We're actually really excited to get to talk to you and have a conversation like that.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit beforehand, and for probably I probably like 5 years now. John, how long have you been doing the podcast? I started listening after you've been doing it for at least a little while, but it's been a while I've been listening. I just don't know how long.
I say we're in season 6, but I kind of made up that number because we did like the first 3 seasons all in one shot, which, when I said I wanted to do the podcast, I think I had the first 80 shows lined up ahead of time. Fran was talking about being a little better planned out. And I was like, look, if I'm going to do this, I've got to have this planned out and ready to go. And so Mike Berkeley and I did the first 70 or 80 shows together without stopping, and then took a big deep breath and went, that's enough of that. And so I came back and said it was season 4, and we're now in season 6, but there's some question about
it. And what episode are you on now?
Oh, I have no idea.
That means a lot. So.
And I appreciate this because there's times where I look at Tom and I'm like, I just don't know if we can fit this in. Like, we're so busy. Like, and you keep, oh, we need to do this. We need to fit this one. And we had a list of people we wanted to have on that we started with that we've deviated so far from that we've only hit a couple of the people. We just keep going in, as the conversations go in different directions, we keep going in different directions. And you keep like, how do we fit this in? How do we it
was actually episode 9 was the first one we did off of our list. And then we haven't looked back. We still have like 10 people left on that initial list that we put out that said, hey, we want to have these people on. So we'll get to them eventually. There's just so much ground to cover. But
and Richard was on episode 19.
19, that's what I was going to say as well. But if you haven't already and you're really interested in learning more about native plants and the uses for native plants, definitely check out the Native Plant Podcast. That was one of I've listened to a ton of podcasts for years now, but that was one of the ones that kind of was in our space. And I learned a lot from, and where we probably just scratched the surface in a lot of things, they go really in depth, and you have some super knowledgeable people on there. So
Yeah.
you guys are doing a great job.
Yeah. I couldn't, well, I'm not that now. Like, I listened to yours, and there's a lot of great native plant podcasts in that space,
Mhm.
and I consider yours one of the top. But I'm not knowledgeable enough to have that kind of that kind of conversation. So I'm really envious and jealous when I listen to your podcast, because I'm like, I could never do that.
Well, it's funny because my wife once said to me, aren't you going to run out of people you can talk to? And you guys were just talking about, how do we fit this guy in? How do we fit that guy in?
Yeah.
Or this person in? And, and that's what I basically said to her. I mean, there's just so much, and our show is not only about native plants. We talk about conservation and
Mhm.
conservation issues and whatnot. And so there's a deep well.
Yes, there is.
Great. So I guess we should probably kick into this a little bit. And it's hard to say. I don't even know what the best place to start. And the funny thing is, because we're talking about gardening with native plants or native plants in your landscape, some of the conversations we've had over time is, is it even right to garden? Like it's become so philosophical at some point, and we can even touch on that a little bit as well. But what, like, just starting with native plants in your landscape, if you're a novice and even a novice gardener or novice to native plants, what are the best reasons to give to someone to use native plants to make that leap and become more knowledgeable, not to just make a decision based on beauty, but more on ecology for pollinators, for so many other reasons? What are some of the best reasons you can give for someone to make that leap if they're not already doing it? Anyone can start. Don't make me call on you.
I'll start out. I think there's actually, I really truly feel that there's already an awakening happening, that people are becoming more in tune with the importance of native plants. I feel like I'm not only preaching to the choir per se. I'm also kind of expanding my reach to folks who are kind of newbies to native plants, and their genuine interest is, well, I feel anyway, is how can I support the planet in small ways by attracting wildlife. I think there's an awareness now kind of growing in our public about a lot of endangered and threatened species. The monarch is the perfect ambassador. A lot of folks are wanting to plant plants that support monarchs and other pollinators and butterflies. So it's not only beauty, I think, which, certainly gardening was for beauty. And there's, the whole gardening trade is all around beautiful, exotic, non-native plants, but we're turning to natives now because we realize, the word is getting out, that there's an ecological evolutionary connection between wildlife species and native plants. You got to have the native plants in order to support the wildlife.
Yeah, I mean, I could sort of follow that up with saying, as far as like homeowners go, I have conversations obviously with them all the time, and there is, yes, an awakening to a lot of folks, but and I'm going to go down a bad path, I think, here, but I'm going to go anyway. The bigger problem is the monarch's great, the honeybee, even though it's not a native, it's great. That brought a lot of attention to pollinators, but our industry it's using a model from the 1960s to manage landscapes, and that's the bigger problem, outside of all the work that's being done from Jersey Friendly Yards and Benjamin Volt and his work, and that he does. I think the bigger thing is having the industry be more aware of it and have them implement more natives into their landscapes, and also having them educated so they can educate their clients as to why they're using them.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a big deficit that our industries has as far as that goes in a big way. So I think that's a major problem. Not really answering the question you wanted, but
no, that's okay.
I think that's a big issue we have to deal with.
do you find, like, say, John, do you find a bigger awareness with the clients you're dealing with, or do you get more pushback? Do you think is it becoming more divided where maybe you get both, maybe a lot more pushback and more people that are more knowledgeable that know what they want?
I definitely don't think it's more divided than it was. I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, and I was just talking to a client down in Alexandria, Virginia yesterday, and I live in the Washington, D.C. area, which is surrounded by politics. And we were talking about the fact that every time there's an administration change, there's like this entire change of the mentality of Washington, D.C. And so I moved here during the first Bush administration, and then Clinton came on, and it was like this environmental awakening happened. And I'm not going to get too into the politics of those people or anything, but it kind of went back and forth a little while with, we're not talking about the environment anymore. Well, we're going to talk about it again. And now we're to the point where it's an established topic. We just had another change of administrations. And even the last administration didn't really want to talk about it, but they couldn't help it because there's so many people saying, no, this is a topic we have to talk about. And native plants are a part of that. The other thing I wanted to add in is that, it's not just about the ecology of using native plants. It's a cultural part of our history. I always talk about, inkberry being what we would have written the Constitution with. And you guys have New Jersey tea up there, what the colonists drank during, after they threw the tea overboard, and the Oswego tea, the other tea that they drank. There's a lot of our own history tied to native plants. And I think sometimes people like you and I don't talk about that enough.
And when we had Samuel Thayer on, he feels a lot of that is kind of hidden. Like, we're so far removed that we have to start reintroducing people to that history because they feel like we've lost that connection with that. And it's about bringing part of that connection back. I think that's a wonderful point. We talked about using pokeweed for ink, like he was saying his daughter uses pokeweed to write papers, and it's, we've lost that. We've really lost a lot of that.
I don't want to get too off track just in the start of the
get
podcast.
Off track.
But that was his whole premise, was we've lost so much of our food history and with it our human history, just because you had people from a small area of the world conquer the rest of the world and kind of erase a lot of that. And there's so many things that not just for food, but for everyday uses, like you mentioned with ink, that people just found in nature. So no, that's an interesting outlook on it.
Yeah, I agree.
I guess on the flip side of that is, since native plants are such a new topic to so many people, what are some of the misconceptions that you see people have?
Well, I think there's, although there's an awareness, I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen. I think folks, they're in it because they want to support wildlife, for example, and I'll start preaching about the benefits of native plants, but then they'll say, oh, well, the birds come eat my Japanese barberry berries, so aren't I feeding the birds? And I say, well, yes, but unfortunately, that bird is going to carry that Japanese barberry berry and seed to the woods, and they are excellent seed dispersers, so they're going to deposit it in the woodlands with a nice little package of fertilizer in the rich soil of the woodlands, and it's going to grow there, and you're never going to know it unless you take a walk in the woods. And that invasive Japanese barberry is going to start out competing all the natives, and soon we have a woodlands full of Japanese barberry. So a little bit of education about the importance of native plants, and also about the importance of not planting invasive species, which I think, back to what Rich was saying earlier, is educating not only homeowners who want to do the right thing, but also educating the landscaping community about updating, I guess, the retailers, the growers, to start planting the native plants in mass, so that folks are going to be buying the proper plants, buying native plants.
Yeah, I mean, how many of your customers or clients think that insects are bad, that you're planting weeds and it's bringing all these insects, and I don't want insects in my yard? I mean, are you still coming across those types of arguments?
Yeah.
Well, we don't.
Uh,
I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think Becky brought up a good point that the monarch is kind of this ambassador for the insects, and so that's kind of an opening door that people can go into and have that conversation. Whereas 20 years ago, we were talking about what kind of raid to spray in the backyard, and how to keep the mosquitoes out, and oh my God, there's a dragonfly. What are we going to do? That's a terrible thing. And
Yeah.
so, I think E.O. Wilson talking about biodiversity, and Dr. Doug Tallamy now talking about the insect apocalypse and all of these things. Without insects, we're not going to make it very far. And so it's a good starting point, I think.
Yeah. Richard, you were going to say?
Yeah, and I think to the question of, and it also goes back to the idea you mentioned before about pushback from clients. I think, and I'm sure you guys can agree, that when you market towards the people that want this kind of work, you don't get that pushback. So that's part of our philosophy, is that, as I go through my checklist of whether a client is going to have an alignment with our company, I know pretty quickly whether we're going to be able to work for them or not, especially if the phone conversation goes okay and I walk onto the property and they've got, Chamaecyparis and Berberis and boxwood sheared to an inch of their life, and I know respectfully decline to work on their property, educate them on what we're doing and bring the bulldozer in and maybe start fresh, or start to pick at the corners and start to install, native plants as we can, as their budget and their ideas allow.
Okay. I mean, but there's a place for everyone to start, I would imagine. Like, this is such a radical idea for so many people that I find that you may have to ease in a little bit. If let's put it this way. And this is a hard one. If you had to pick one, if you had to talk someone into either using one native plant or getting rid of 10 square feet of grass, turf, which would you pick? Where would you start?
I would, well, here's the thing. It depends how that conversation's going.
Yeah.
Right. So if the client says, you know what, I love my lawn and there's no way we're going to take anything out of it. Again, that goes to, I'm all about educating. Otherwise I wouldn't be here right now.
Yeah. So
there's a fine line where education and profit sort of have to happen.
Yeah.
And if it's going to be a relationship where, I'm beating my head against the wall trying to get our educational values of why we're doing things to across to the client, then it just doesn't work, because they're going to be unhappy. We're not going to be able to do the work they want. So to your point, it's hard to say. It depends. Yeah. It really depends on the individual client for us anyway.
And I guess the elephant in the room that we should probably mention, this is a business, and our first rooted discussion when we talk about the business of native plants, it's important, to the end user to realize that for as beautiful and wonderful that we love this topic and we're all very passionate about it, in order to continue spreading that message, you have to be profitable at it, and you have to have values and stick to those core values. And I can appreciate you saying, I don't think we can work together, because you're a business that needs to make money to continue, and you have people that depend on you to support. So I would imagine, do you have a lot of those conversations, and how hard is it to have that conversation? And how many of those, I guess, people do you eventually win over in having this conversation?
For us anyway, it doesn't happen very often, again, because I said the way we market.
Yeah.
Because we're marketing towards the people that want organic lawns or want, native plants on their properties. Occasionally we have that conversation with people that I don't even think they've looked at our website, and they call us up out of the blue. And another part of this is too, that when you start to do work like this, you start to differentiate yourself from other companies, and you start to lose the chuck in the truck or the tire kickers that a lot of companies deal with. So it's a whole nother level, and that you start to, the clientele you start to deal with, I think, for us anyway.
John, how about you?
You know, if you've listened to the podcast or if you've heard me speak, you've heard me talk about the fact that 20 years ago, I'd go to somebody's house and I'd go, well, if you plant this plant, you'll get this butterfly, or you'll get this bird. And they just kind of go, get off my lawn, hippie. And that just doesn't happen anymore. And people now call us for these things. But one of my favorite projects to show when I give talks is one that we did back in 2000. And again, sorry to be a Washingtonian here, but the client was the commander of the carrier fleet at the time, and his son, we had just gone into Iraq, and his son was a F-14 pilot in Iraq. And so he was a very conservative guy, and I was there to give him a price on a patio, and he was telling me how they wanted to landscape their house. And I was like, well, you know, you could put in this native plant, you could put in that native plant. And he just kind of stopped me in the middle of the sentence, and he just was like, look, I don't really care about any of that. I just want some barberries and some junipers and things. And I kind of sat there and I went, oh geez, what do I say? What do I say? You know, and I went, well, you know, gosh, you know, if you want these Asian and Russian plants in your garden, I guess that's your choice, sir. And he just kind of took a step back and just went, and I said, I like Virginia, I love Virginia. I love to use plants that are native to Virginia. And we ended up, it was a couple $100,000 job. It was a big project. And he probably has the most ecologically sound landscape in Alexandria. He still lives there. It's still the same. The landscape is held. But it was finding that moment to reach him, because he wasn't into the science, he wasn't into the ecology, but he was into the patriotism of it. And so it was just kind of a luck moment that I had a decent thought. My mom always said, when in doubt, say something smart. And so I followed my mom's advice and tried. And there we were.
We always talk about making the circle bigger, and you're not always going to get someone on the ecology of it, and you're not always going to get someone of the science. Not everyone has the same interests. And that's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have been as quick on my feet with that
Oh,
one.
I would have just kind of been like, okay, sir, and just shuffled away.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. But
I was this close.
So one of the things we often hear, or I kind of cringe when I see it a little bit online, is that native plants are maintenance free or low maintenance or use less water. What do you say to people who look at native plants, and I don't want to say that it's not true, but think that that's true across the board with native plants? Becky, you've been going first, so I'm going to call on you to go first.
Yeah.
I was thinking that sounded a little bit like an industry question, but I'm happy to jump in and offer you my opinion. Well, I think me personally, as a backyard gardener, I think I'm the only one here that's not in the industry. I kind of come from gardening personally, but also as an educator. So when I talk about planting natives and the Ocean County Soil Conservation District, we have a guide. Our signature guide is called Low Maintenance Landscaping for the Barnica Bay Watershed. And it is a little bit tricky because no gardening or landscaping or, keeping a yard is no maintenance. There's always some maintenance, but I try to tout the fact that I'm a really lazy gardener, and when I go out to my garden, I don't go out to water. I don't go out to pull weeds or trim hedges or anything like that. I go out to I'm all about the butterflies and the bees and the birds, and I want to attract wildlife and enjoy them while I'm out there. So I'm going to plant native plants that, in my eye, look good when they look bad. And I always think of, I'm going to quote somebody right now, when you change the way you look at things you look at change. It took me a couple of years to really, truly understand what that meant. William Dyer, I believe, is the person who said that first. So when I see a dead tree, and I have two in my yard, one right in the front yard, instead of seeing an eyesore, I see a home for woodpeckers. When I see tall grass that hasn't been mowed, it's usually planted there purposely, or maybe it hasn't been mowed, but I see seeds for the birds instead of, an eyesore. So I try to look at the landscape as something that is productive for the wildlife that I enjoy living in my yard, as opposed to, is it trimmed neatly? Are the neighbors going to be complaining? Certainly, I know a lot of folks do come to me and say, the municipality, the zone officer is out here with a ruler. What am I going to do? So that's certainly something to keep aware of. But I come back to them and say, well, educate your neighbor, create a flyer with some nice photos, invite them to your yard for, some lemonade, and show them the butterflies, show them how you raise the caterpillars, and actually tag the monarch and let it go. Bring the kids over so they have a good time in your yard. Get a sign. Signs are really useful. Pollinator habitat, bird-friendly habitat. I put one on my dead tree in the front yard so that everybody knows, with a little nest box, so everybody can see that that dead tree has a purpose. It's not just, dangerous, which it's not. But I guess education is really the key to sharing information.
Does anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Becky's saying. There's no such thing as no maintenance. It's low maintenance, and the maintenance is different. And one of the things too is the misconception that because it's native, it has to be this wild, unkept looking garden. I mean, even if you had a rose garden, if you didn't do anything, it would be wild looking. So it's just a different type of maintenance. It's not that there's never ever going to be any maintenance. It's just different.
I agree. I want to start, before we start going into the nitty gritty of it. And I know, Becky, in our conversations, you're going to agree with this. And I know all of you are going to agree with it, but even though we always praise native plants, it really starts with the soil. And soil health, because if you don't have that, it's downhill from there. So is there anything that you would recommend to our listeners if they're going to start doing this? What's the best place for them to start? Do you recommend them getting a soil test? Do you recommend adding to that soil or fixing that soil?
Well, I think they should go out and roll around in the soil and get to know it really, really well. Pick it up, smell it, look at it. What does it feel like? How does it feel when they hold it in their hand and kind of squeeze it? Put it up to your face and smell it. Does it smell nice and fresh and earthy? Or does it have a little bit of an odor like a rotten egg that can tell you something? What color is it? Is it really sandy? Is it gritty? Is it smooth and soft? Add some water to your soil and see what happens. So really kind of get to know your soil, just, for your own sake, to kind of educate yourself on what your soil looks like. Get to know who lives in the soil. Are there any worms visible when you dig a hole in your soil? Are there any other arthropods in there? Certainly you want your soil to be teeming with life. Healthy soil is full of life. That is really a sign of really healthy soil. If you have a lot of critters crawling around in your soil, living in your soil. And then also, of course, get your soil tested. You can package it up and send it through the mail, literally, to Rutgers Soil Testing Lab, so that you get to know what the texture is of your soil, if it's sand, silt, or clay, or sand, clay, or loam. Get a pH test so that you know if you have slightly acidic soil or neutral soil or slightly alkaline soil. Get to know what nutrients, a nutrient test. So you don't have to apply fertilizers if you don't need to. You might have them all in your soil already. So those are some basic things to start to get to know your soil.
You can you could do your own homemade perk test and take a coffee can, put a hole in the bottom, fill it with water, put it in the soil, and see how long it takes for that water to drain.
I'm sorry, Becky, sorry I started to giggle a little bit there. I just started thinking about you describing getting to know your soil, and I'm thinking, oh, Saul's going to hear this and he's going to call in. I ate some of my soil.
I'm waiting for that phone call. I want a picture.
So,
Becky said that I needed to taste my soil, so I did.
So Richard, once they get to know their soil, I know you're a firm believer of, if you're going to fix that soil, if there's a problem, to do it organically. That's one of your philosophies. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as far as fertilization in gardens go, we do none.
Okay. All right.
No, because once the gardens are established, you don't have to, you don't have to do a lot, especially when you're dealing with natives. A great book to pick up is Teaming with Microbes, Jeff Lowenfeld's book, Teaming with Microbes, and also a quick read is the Soil Biology Primer by Elaine Ingham. Those are two good books, quick read. The Soil Biology Primer from Elaine Ingham is nice and quick, and Jeff Lowenfeld's a bit more detailed. But those are really two good stepping stones to start off with. And then you start to deal with turf, and that's a whole different story. That's a whole different management style system altogether. So, but yeah, I mean, once you're dealing with native plants, we do very little fertilization. You just put the plants, pay attention to the plant culture, pay attention to what kind of soil's there, and put the right plant in the right place, and there's your low maintenance garden. Simple as that.
We just recently hired a new employee about a month ago, Rick, and he has a soils background, and one of the first things he asked me was, what do we have to do to eliminate fertilizer in our mix? What steps can we take to make that disappear? And I thought that was a very interesting observation right off the bat, and I actually love that question. So we're actually having those discussions already. So it's because I don't know that it's really necessary for us to have.
Yeah. And John, what do you guys do down in Virginia? It's a similar area to where we are in New Jersey, but still it's not exactly the same.
We plant the right plant in the right place. We actually lost a project this spring because we told the client we were not going to fertilize, and people will see our pictures on Instagram or on Facebook and stuff, and our mountain mint is standing straight up and our switchgrass is standing straight up, and they're like, how do you get these plants to stand up? And I'm like, we don't fertilize them. They don't want fertilizer. Your little blue stem shouldn't flop. It's having the right plant in the right place. And I know the Master Gardeners program preaches that all the time, and a lot of other places do, but it's really that simple. Becky had a lot of really good points about rolling around in your soil and getting to know it. I may have been born in New Jersey, but I was raised in Ohio, where we had 18 to 24 inches of topsoil. So very different, place to grow plants than Virginia, where we have this, I don't know what you call it, red clay that we have to grow plants in. But, people are always constantly surprised that we're able to put in plants that thrive and do well in these things. And, I'll go back to Rich's point, it's education. And I know I speak for all of us when I say that we're constantly learning ourselves. None of us know everything. That's why we go to symposiums. That's why we go to these seminars. That's why we listen to these podcasts, because we want to learn.
You brought up a fantastic point, and I know we've talked about this before, just putting the right plant in the right place. And if you get to know your soils, you can understand, oh, this is more wet, this is more dry, this is heavier, this plant likes sun. If you're putting a sun-loving plant in the shade, it's going to stretch. If you're putting a wetland plant in an upland, it's going to struggle. And that's when you start seeing people putting Band-Aids on, saying, I need to spray because I'm having insect problems. And it's really a problem of not matching up the plant with the right environment.
Yeah, and it's got to be tough in some regards, because some people fall in love with a certain plant, or they'll visit a place like around us. You go to Bowman's Hill, or you go to even the Pine Barrens, and you see something and you say, oh, I want that for my yard. It's almost a possessive kind of way. It's like, I want that, and I want to be able to look at it from the comfort of my home. But if that plant's not going to grow there, then if it's not the right plant for that place, then it'll struggle. What do you guys, John and Rick, do you have that come up often where someone wants a particular look or they want a particular plant, and then but it's just not going to work there?
Yeah, it's the wrong plant.
Not so much. Again, it goes back for us. It goes back to the marketing, you know, and I'm sure it's the same with John. I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but people come to us because of the work we do. It's not that square peg, round hole scenario. You know, they're coming to us for what we do, and they value the knowledge that we've gained. And John's absolutely right. It's like in 2005 when we transitioned from conventional to organic and ecological, you know, I was stuck in a rut. I was doing things by the calendar. I was adding, you know, manures to soil. Why? Because, well, you're supposed to. I didn't know why I was doing it, just because. And then once we started, you know, you start looking at soil biology and realizing that there's so much stuff going on under your feet that you need to nurture that to make your gardens work. It's like every day is something new, and where I never had that before. And, you know, I loved what I do. Well, I love what I did before. Now it's like I wake up in the morning, and as much as my body will allow me to skip to work, you know, I'm anxious to get to work every day because of the work we're doing. It's so much different and rewarding than it was before. And I don't want to take too much time, but just to touch on the soil, this amendments of the soil is also important. You know, when do you amend things and when you don't? It's the same as over fertilization. You don't just want to amend the garden because, well, you amend the garden. If you're going to put a blue stem and things like that, and they don't want rich soils with a lot of amendments. If you're planting things that are more understory, then you might want to put some compost in the soil and amend the soil. You know, so it's important to know what you're putting in that space and what to do with the soil before you plant.
I'm actually going to add off of what Fran said a little bit ago about our new employee who was looking at our potting mix, and part of it was by adding the fertilizer to our potting mix, we were creating so many more problems with algae, weeds, and then everything where that water drained into ponds. Well, then you were having more problems there. And he was like, well, you get rid of the fertilizer, you don't have these problems, you don't have these weed problems, you don't have these algae problems that are hurting the plants anymore. So he just kind of clicked. And that's kind of what there's that job up in Syracuse, Fran, at Onondaga Lake.
Yeah.
They found it failed the first time because they brought in like rich topsoil and planted all these plants in rich topsoil. They fertilized them, and they said the only thing that grew was cattails. Yeah. And then when they actually just used the native soils that were there in other areas, and the second time around, that's when they had really good success, and they found they've had more diversity kind of plants. Even though they planted things all over, they kind of found their spot on their own as well. So that was an interesting presentation, and then that is really just scaled down to your yard.
But I would imagine that's difficult as well, because if you look at developments here in New Jersey, I can't speak for the whole country. There's no native soil. I just recently had an oil tank taken out of my yard that was in ground, and a remediation had to be done, and that soil was that was about as far from from native soil as you could get. So, I mean, how unnatural are the conditions that you're going to when you go to customers' yards that you're finding that a hard time matching up because it's such an unnatural condition to try to naturalize? Do you see that, John? Is that something that an issue that you have in Virginia?
Well, certainly. I live in Loudoun County, Virginia. It's the fastest growing county in the United States. And, I go down the road every day and see forests getting bulldozed, and so they can put houses in. And of course, a lot of times the developers are taking that topsoil off and selling it and leaving you with nothing in your yard. But again, I think it goes back to kind of what Becky said earlier of getting down in the dirt and getting to know your soil and seeing what's left, seeing what's there. I think also that people tend to want to solve a problem, and sometimes that leads you to other problems. Like Tom, you were saying with, well, we added fertilizer to the soil because that's what you're supposed to do, and you're right. That's what we're all taught in school. That's what we're all kind of taught by whomever we're listening to, is that, oh, well, we've got to do something. No, you don't necessarily have to. You have to find plants that grow in those conditions and spec them into the project and kind of start there. But soil's incredibly important, because the plants are going to live the rest of their lives in that soil, and so you have to have the right mix and things. But I think commercial fertilizers, like Rich is saying, stay away from them. Do everything organically you can. It may take a little while to build up some soil, but most homeowners live in their houses for 5 to 10 years. Most of them do phased landscapes where, maybe they do the front of the house one year and then the side of the house the following year. And so, you talk to them, you educate them about building up those soils, preparing for when they're going to be planted. And I think that's another way to approach it.
Before we move on, one of our colleagues, I guess he's retired now, Mike, I'm drawing a blank, Feller from New York City Parks. And I apologize. But they did a study where they realized that when they were looking at restorations, anywhere that invasives were at their worst was soil that was former landfill. And anywhere that it wasn't growing tended to be native soil and that natives were growing in. So they actually put through that any excavation being done in New York City, the soil couldn't be removed from New York City. And they started stockpiling it just for their restoration purposes, so that they knew that native soil was staying there, and they could do the proper thing and try to combat invasives by making sure they had the right soil, that invasives, invasives love that nutrient rich landfill soil. And that's where they were, it was once they understood soil, their restoration started to change. Yeah. And that was huge.
And for all the listeners, we're in the planning phase of having a complete soil rooted discussions. So that's, we should keep that on your calendars to either skip it because you don't care about soil, or you should listen to it, really. Yeah. But because as Becky was saying, it's kind of the start of this whole thing.
Yes.
So
could I say one more thing about soil?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Sure. Because I love soil. So we were talking about, John, you mentioned how the topsoil is taken off and resold, and Fran, you mentioned that the soil was removed and reused. But once that soil is kind of disassociated with the landscape, it definitely loses its quality, because as we were talking about earlier, one of the most important things about soil is the life in the soil. So when you're removing it and it's sitting there for a while and it kind of dries out, a lot of the life it can no longer exist. It is no longer soil, it becomes dirt. So just something to keep in mind, that there's so many interactions between the soil itself and the microbes, whether it's the bacteria or the fungi or the protozoa or the earthworms, that have a relationship with each other in the soil and also have a relationship with the plant roots. So it's going to take a while if you do get topsoil, purchase topsoil or, amend your soil in one way or another. It is definitely going to take a while before it becomes, I'll just say, functional again. It's just something important to remember.
One of the things that we discussed here internally is where we collect seed to grow plants for our plant production is, we always talk about incorporating mycorrhizae. But what if you take some of the soil from where you're collecting seed, some of the microbes that are already there, a bucket of soil that you can incorporate into the potting mix and make sure you're continuing that life of that soil, because you're taking plants that are grown in a specific scenario and you're putting them in a complete lab, basically a lab scenario being grown in a nursery. So what's the best way that you can make sure they're getting a healthy plant to go back to that condition? So it takes it on all ends.
We don't want to get me started on mycorrhizae too.
Yeah.
But
so there's compost teas and things like that, right? So that's a way you can speed up getting it.
Yeah.
that biology back into the soil by, if you do, like, for example, you can't get Ericaceous mycorrhiza, right? Because they can't produce it fast enough to be able to get it into market so that we can use it on our plants. But you can put a broad spectrum mycorrhizal application down when you plant. But if you have rhododendrons, you can go out into the forest and pull some soil up, and you can make compost tea, and you'll get that, you get that mycorrhizal fungi and be able to expand that with the compost tea application.
So just the length of time that we spent on soil should stress how important soil is.
Yes.
So if you take away anything, even if a lot of this goes over everyone's head, you're taking away at least that this is a huge building block in which to progress from.
Yeah. Moving on, we wanted to talk more about the plants that you guys like to use. And I originally said, what's the top 5 plants? But looking back at what we just talked about, I'm actually going to rephrase that and say, what are some plants that you kind of find work across the board that you really like to use? And then where can people go to find what plants are going to work best for their soils or work best for their conditions? If they have a dry, sandy yard, what's a resource they can go to find out what'll work in those conditions?
So is this where I get to plug my Jersey?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, you do.
So Jersey Friendly Yards, jerseyyards.org, 2 Ys. We have a Jersey Friendly plant database on our website, Jersey Friendly Yards. And in the database, there's searchable filters, and the filters they pertain to the different conditions that you would find in your yard, such as soil, specifically the pH. So you can check off, is my soil alkaline, acidic, neutral? How about my soil moisture? Is it well draining, medium draining, wet? Light conditions, full sun, part sun, shade. We've also included, do you want trees? What, plant type, shrub, perennial, annual, ferns, grasses, ground covers. Other things include deer resistance. That's a big one in Jersey. People want deer resistant plants. Salt tolerance. We also have 2 different ecosystems in our database. If you happen to live on the coast or in the Barrier Island, or if you happen to live in the Pinelands, you can check an eco region, drought tolerance. So once you go through all the filters and you check off the conditions that match your yard, there's 400 plants in the database, more than 400, and that will kind of narrow down the choices to the ones that specifically match. So right plant, right place. So you get a lot of right plants for your place. And then you can click on each plant and you can read the details of the plant and how high it's going to grow and the bloom time and the color and what wildlife it attracts. So it's an excellent resource for finding the right plant for your yard.
Do you have a handful of plants that you would recommend that, not that they're going to fit every scenario, but tend to work in a lot of scenarios?
Well, I was thinking about this because I knew you were going to ask this question. And I want to tout grasses because I feel like grasses are kind of frowned upon. Lawn is the only grass people want to grow, it seems. But I've just kind of played around in my own yard for, past couple of years and planting different native grasses, and they grow. Talk about, low maintenance as far as like having to go out and like take care of plants. Really, grasses, to me anyway, require very little maintenance. And I like to leave mine up in the wintertime because of course they feed the birds. So I came up with a short list, and the one I love most in my yard is called purple love grass, Eragrosta Spectabilis. And it's kind of a lower growing kind of clumping grass. And when it's in bloom, it has like pinkish purple flowers. And I swear they sparkle, like it sparkles in my garden. And I'm always immediately attracted to it when it's in bloom. So that's a favorite. And I just added a new one to our database called bottle brush grass. So I haven't planted it myself, but it looks really, really pretty. The flower, it looks like, the brush that you would use to clean a bottle. It's really fancy. So I'm going to tout grasses today.
Great choices.
And that's Elymus hastrix.
Yes.
I've actually seen that on the trail we have right behind the nursery here, growing wildly. I'd never seen it before. I'd heard the genus and I've heard of the species, but and then it just happened. Oh, that's got to be what that is. I've seen that picture. I don't know how many times.
And when they're mixed with perennials, they just looks so nice in the gardens. You've got your beautiful, colorful flowers, and then you have this other texture that the grasses provide.
Yeah. John, do you have any resources like Jersey Friendly Yards in the DMV area, the DC metro area?
Yeah, I typically will steer people towards native plant societies as a good source to find lots of good information on sourcing things. The Virginia Native Plant Society has a whole page of nurseries and landscape designers and whatnot. We have what we call the Plant Nova Native Initiative here, Nova being Northern Virginia. But there's also the Plant Virginia Native Initiative. And I always talk about how writers will have writer's block. Designers also get designer's block. And so I always go to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and they have a really great database for plants. And you put in there, you know, I'm living in upstate New York. I've got a full sun hillside that's really dry, and I want a plant that's 3 feet tall, and it'll spit out 20 or 30 species. And then you can just kind of pick and choose from, you know, a list of things. The National Wildlife Federation worked together with Dr. Talamy to put together a search engine for a very similar type of thing. So those are kind of my go-tos for that kind of stuff.
Okay, awesome. And did you have one or two plants that you tend to use a lot, or that you think that most people can't go wrong if they were to put that in their garden?
Seriously, you're gonna limit me to one or two?
All right. How about 3 or 4? I'll let you go 5. Get wild.
I will start with my favorite butterfly bushes, because every year I get phone calls from people saying that, oh, I'm not seeing any butterflies. I'm not seeing any butterflies. It's, you know, the end of the year, end of the world. Well, I'm not seeing any butterflies. And what people need to remember is that a lot of butterflies migrate south for the winter. And so it takes them a while to get back up north. And I'm sure they get to New Jersey after they come to Virginia. So maybe I can call you guys the next time I start seeing them come in, and, and I can let you know. But
They're on the way.
2 bushes that I plant that, to me, you know, when they start to flower, the butterflies are coming back. And again, I don't know if these are necessarily, I'm sure you have buttonbush in New Jersey.
Yep.
Cephalanthus Oxidantalis, very beautiful flower, really great shrub, medium sized, feeds a lot of butterflies and pollinators in general. And just a great plant for the landscape. Likes to have wet feet, but it'll do well outside of that as well. The other one is bottlebrush Buckeye, which is more of a southern native, but probably still hardy in New Jersey. Really great fall color. I'm a Buckeye, so I have to, you know, push the Buckeyes as much as I can. And but when that plant's in bloom, the you know, they've got 12-inch flowers that come out, and they just get covered in tiger swallowtails and every kind of swallowtail butterfly you can imagine.
And they form great colonies too.
Yeah.
You know, they're both great choices, because buttonbush, like you said, they like to have wet feet. That's one of the few native shrubs that can really just take permanent inundation. But it can take it dry. So it can take that varied situation, which is awesome. Do you want to do, you gave shrubs. Do you want me to let you do some herbaceous? You want to throw in? I don't want to limit you.
Sure. You know, if you listen to the show, you'll hear me plug Euphorbia Corollada all the time, which is prairie baby's breath, or flowering spurge. And that's one of those plants that will grow on absolutely no soil at all. But it's just a tiny little thing when you do that. But if you put it into some good garden soil, you know, I have them in my garden that are 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide. They bloom all summer long. The Euphorbias are in the same families with poinsettias, and so you're looking at bracts rather than flowers. That's a great one, and not something you see very often. And so if you run into it and you can add it to your garden, it's a great plant to have. Probably my newest addition to the plant palette would be the Scutellarias, skullcaps.
Okay.
And you know, I saw those 15 years ago down in Cullowhee, And as I was touring a native plant garden down there, and I thought, my God, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Why have I never seen this before? And typically when that's the case, I'll say, there must be something wrong. Maybe it gets blown away by powdery mildew, or maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's got some problem. Maybe the deer love it. But I started using it 5-6 years ago, and it has done nothing but perform really well for us. I have a couple of clients that allow me to experiment at their property, and so I got some from James Brown, who lives right down the street from you guys, and New Moon Nurseries. And I went to some clients and said, hey, I'm going to put these in. If they die, we'll replace them with something else, but give me some space that I can kind of test these on you. And they've done nothing but, thrive and spread, and they seem to be deer proof, which is a big thing we talk about in the trade. What plants stay away from deer. So that's the other newbie to my my palette that I really have. We use them all the time now. I order in a bunch in the spring, and then we're speccing them into jobs all summer long.
There's some great choices.
Yeah.
So Richard, before we ask Richard, I need to lay out a disclaimer that just because he does such a great impersonation, Richard is not Saul. They're two different people.
Yeah.
So I don't want people to not like hearing you and going, maybe Richard is calling in and he's Saul. Richard is not.
Just a long lost cousin.
Yes. Yes. All right. How about you? What are
yeah. So obviously, well, not obviously, but anybody that hears me talk always knows that I talk about oaks, white oaks specifically. As bottle brush Buckeye, you see it over my shoulder. We use that a lot. That's because parviflora. Pycnanthum muticum. Love using that one. Solidagos. Eupatorium perifoliatum and Eupatorium hyssopfolium are, if anybody native bees on their properties, like the pycnanthums and the eupatoriums will, outside of the coneflower, did you guys call as the entry, the gateway, or the gateway drug for natives, I guess what you guys call it, right? So those three would also be right behind the echinaceans, because they just, when they're doing their thing, I mean, they've got thousands of pollinators flying around on them, all kinds of different things, skippers and all kinds of bees, and they're really awesome.
Awesome. How about resources? Do you have any resources that you'd want to throw out?
Nobody's mentioned Pinelands yet.
No, that's okay.
So Pinelands for sure. And we do use a lot of plugs, so we'll use Pinelands. In New Jersey we use Pleasant Run, Sunset Farmstead. They're really great. I mean, you guys know them, so
they're all great people. Sunset Farmstead has been on the podcast, and the folks at Pleasant Run. I mean, they're great because they're not, I believe, right? They're not using neonics or anything like that when in their plants they're growing. So they're using. I don't think they can call it organic the way they're growing their plants there, but they're pretty close, I think. Yep. And even though we're wholesale and other a lot of the other nurseries we talk about are wholesale, we do try to educate and make a lot of great information available. So our website, even if you're not a wholesaler, you can still go on and look at our plant information or narrow it down. There's a plant search. Tom just built a great new website where you can pick your conditions and go through it. Like, I need this much inundation, I need this light requirement, and it will show you what plants are available. So even if you're not buying them from us and you just want to get them from some, a local retailer, that's a great resource. And actually Tom's wife, Melissa, who we called on the last episode, I should have given her a plug. A lot of the infographics you see on her social media, she is doing. She listens to the podcast and puts together these great graphics. So if you follow a lot of these places North Creek has a fantastic social media presence.
Oh yeah.
So even though you can't get the plants from them, get your information from them, because it's great information. None of us are doing it to directly benefit us. It's getting the right. We want the education out there.
And I was actually going to touch on this as a final thought, but we want our perception is to get as much information about native plants out there, even though most people can't get the plants from us. Just because the more people that are into native plants, the more demand there's going to be. Eventually, it'll find its way back to us in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just goodwill.
But if there's more demand, there will be more people in between
Yes.
as well. There's enough space. There's not enough podcasts about native plants. There's not enough businesses that deal with native plants. It needs to get larger.
Our whole social media strategy is just make the graphic look nice, and we're taking stuff from the podcast, what our guests say, going to Jersey Friendly Yards or Lady Bird Johnson, using stuff from their websites, kind of putting in a nice tidy package that can go on Facebook or go on Instagram, and then just have people hit that share button. Our goal is to get at least 10 shares per, and we have a smaller social media presence, but we want like at least 10 shares. And then when it gets up into 50s or 100, then we're going ecstatic, because that just means so many more people are seeing this. The more people that see it, the more people are going to their garden centers, looking at stuff, or calling on landscapers to use this stuff. And that's where we see the big benefit is. In addition, it's just helping the planet. So
exactly.
I have a couple of resources to offer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before we move on. One of my favorite places to purchase seeds and also plants, mail order, is Toadshade Wildflower Farm in Frenchtown, and Wild Ridge Plants up in northern New Jersey. Excellent high quality native plants, and Earth First native plant nursery. So there's a couple for the home gardener.
We talk about those three all the time on the podcast. They're great people. They live it. You know, those are people that that it's to how we say it's still a business. I think to them, like, you can question, do they know it's a business? Like I mean, it's really ingrained in who they are. So and you can't ask for more than that if you want to deal with someone to buy plants.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
One of the next questions.
Wait, sorry, John. Go ahead, please.
If I can just add something in really quick, I would also caution people that because this is a new thing and because this is becoming really popular, there's a lot of people saying that they do native plants that maybe don't.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of garden centers around here that sell a lot of nasty invasive species, but they know that the marketing's there to say they do native plants. And so to them, maybe they're thinking native plants is a dogwood and some inkberry, and that's a native plant garden, and that qualifies them to say that. So do your research, be an educated consumer. And, if you go somewhere and you see a bunch of non-native invasive species being sold, maybe that's not where you want to be.
Yep. No, that's very, very good advice, because as this movement does grow, that's going to happen more and more. So, and
it means there's something to knowing Latin, as difficult as that may be. Write down the Latin name of the plant you want to buy and take that with you to the nursery, because a lot of times plants will share the same genus. A native plant and an invasive plant might be in the same genus, but they're going to have a different second name, specific epithet. So the species is going to be completely different.
And we've talked about it too, that so many native plants have multiple common names depending on the area of the country. You can easily confuse plants just by going. I just had an issue the other day with one of our customers with conflicting common names. So really live by that botanical name, because it's the one and only.
And Becky, I like your advice of bringing it written down, because then you can show them. Because I'm on LinkedIn today and we're going through a whole, how do you pronounce what's the real way? I guess I'll bring it up. We've talked about what I say schizocarium, but also it's pronounced schizacrium, which is right. And we had Steve Castrano on, and we just said, we've been saying it wrong for a long time. But then when we started doing more research, we're like, well, you can find it said both ways in a lot of different places. So I put it on LinkedIn and said, okay, how do you actually say this?
And you know what?
And I'm getting answers on both sides.
Yeah.
It's been pretty interesting.
We've even gotten answers that we hadn't heard before. Yeah. So it's I don't know. It's write it down.
Write it down.
I just always assume however I'm saying it is incorrect. And then whoever else says it differently, right, is my error. But
I go to the Missouri Botanical Garden website, and they actually have a little sound button next to the Latin name, and you just click that button and the scientist will pronounce it for you.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is the Jersey Friendly Yards website, our database. Once you get all your plants that you want from the database, you can actually print out your list and you can bring that with you.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. So do you
It's
wanna,
like when I go see a client, I met with a client last night, and I use all my botanical Latin in my plant lists, and they're like, well, "What is all this?" And I said, "There's this amazing thing called the internet. Cut and paste."
yeah.
Because otherwise you could, how many different butterfly bushes are they going to find if you put butterfly bush on?
All right. One question I have to ask before we continue, and it's pertinent. It's actually pertinent. One thing we didn't ask before we started was if anyone had a time constraint, because one thing I'm realizing we've only asked 4 questions and we're well over an hour into this. So, and we're not going to do a 3-hour podcast, but if anyone has a time constraint, we try to keep it somewhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we'll try to bang through some of these if someone has something pressing. So just raise your hand if we hit that point. So I guess that the next place to go is we kind of talked about resources, soil, and then some plants that you can't go wrong with. But one of the great thing about native plants is that you can really garden for all 4 seasons, and there's some highlights. As you can give, anyone can garden to give themselves something, whether it's for a flower or the look of the plant or even what they attract at certain times of the year. I'd like to talk about tips for gardening for all 4 seasons, and what are some of the things that you go by? Are there certain plants that you look for, or do you try to do that? Do you have customers that ask for that, or do you recommend that in general to try to garden for all 4 seasons of the year?
And John, why don't we start with you this time? You've always been last. I don't want you to feel left out.
Well, I think it's a great question. And again, when you go back to that 1960s logic of gardening, it's all about evergreen and winter. Boxwoods, and if you're a person who's kind of decided to go native and to start doing more native stuff, that means that you're ecologically minded and you're focused on pollinators and things other than just the plants in the garden. And so I think having 4 seasons of interest is imperative to the human eye. And I always say that we build our gardens for the humans that pay for them. I have yet to have a butterfly pay me for a butterfly garden, and not that they need to, but I have a mortgage, I have to put food on the table. So like you said, it's a business. But I get it all the time. I was just at a client's house the other day presenting a plan, and there's a limited amount of evergreens in the native palette, and so the client was like, well, what's this going to look like in the wintertime? And I was like, well, it's going to be beautiful. It's just going to be kind of different than what you've been taught that it should look like. And I tell everybody, we live in a temperate climate, enjoy it. We don't live in the tropics. My wife is Ecuadorian. She's a Latin scientist, and so she'll tell us all how to pronounce the Latin names. But you can't stress enough that we live in a temperate climate. We're going to have a really beautiful spring. We're going to have a really beautiful summer. We're going to have a really beautiful fall if the landscape is designed correctly. And then you're going to have a really beautiful winter time as well. Nothing is prettier to me than ornamental grasses in the wintertime. And I'm not talking about miscanthus grasses. I'm talking about little blue stem. I'm talking about switchgrass. I'm talking about our natives. The other guys kind of make me ill in seeing them in the wintertime. But I think it's incredibly important to have as many seasons of interest as you can have.
Richard, how about you?
So obviously the whole ecological thing is really top of our list with whatever we do. So the 4 seasons, the winter obviously is the issue. The rest of the time it's fine. And like John was saying, to me, there's nothing like the spent seed heads and the golds and the browns and the different textures that you see in the winter. And then, I think probably be important to touch on as far as that goes. Also, how do you maintain that? I know you've had quite a few folks on to talk about native bees and how do you maintain one of these gardens? It's the time of year to get them cleaned up. So a couple of years ago, we had started going to our clients and saying, yeah, that winter garden looks great, and now it's time to clean it up. So what do you do? Because everybody goes in with leaf blowers and rakes their garden beds out, and you take all that good ecology that's sitting there waiting to hatch and go about its business and take all the property. So we started just cutting things down and leaving them, and just we do our nice clean edges and mulch, just tucked up along the edges, and leave everything else. We cut grasses and echinacea and all those things that are maybe 4 feet high into 12-inch pieces, and leave leave the stems up 18 inches for the overwintering and spring insects and native bees the next season. And by the time April rolls around, it's starting to get covered up already. So you don't even need to mulch it.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother aspect of that fourth season gardening. How do you clean it up in the spring? And I know that's a topic I see it a lot on Facebook right now. The whole thing about leave the leaves and, do you cut garden back and when's the right time? Is 50 degrees right? When isn't it? Again, it's a business and clients are expecting you to get out there and start to do some cleanup. So we had to take that balancing act of conventional cleanup and what our customers are and society is used to looking at, and blend the ecological with the conventional. And that's the approach that we take. So.
And that's the big ethical question. Like, I think in our hearts, everyone would love to be a purist. How possible is that? Is it better that they leave some rather than nothing at all? And I guess you pick and choose your battles. You start somewhere and you hope that you eventually win people over more and more every day. It's hard to, you got to find that common ground and get them interested, and then grow from there. So it's the fact that you're able to do that is wonderful, I think, and that's a great place to start.
So what kind of advice, someone who's looking to get into this, they've stumbled across our podcast or the Native Plant Podcast, and they want to get in more into native plants, what kind of advice do you give them to get started?
Start small. That's what I would say.
I was hoping someone would say that. I did not, and I'm paying for it still. That was like 3 years ago.
Just look at one area of your yard. It could be your foundational planting. It could be out by your mailbox. It could be, if you want to start taking out some lawn, that's a bigger job. Not really, but start small.
Yeah, you may not want to take your whole lawn out.
Yeah.
That may be, you may be biting off a little bit more than you could chew.
Yes. However, I'm actually about to take a little bit of my lawn out, and I'm just going to rent a sod cutter, and I'm going to have an instant bed. So it's actually going to, be very beneficial. I'll have no lawn, and it'll be done really easily. Just put my bed right in there. But yeah, just start small. Just start with an invasive species. Take out the invasive species and replace it with a native plant. So you don't even have to build a bed. You're not making extra work for yourself. You're just kind of exchanging one not bad plant. It's not the plant's fault, but you're exchanging one plant for a better plant.
It's good advice. It's really good advice.
Any other advice?
I could add to Becky's comment about taking the lawn out. Obviously, you guys know me. Start with areas of lawn that are problematic, shady areas or wet areas where you're always consistently throwing grass seed down. Again, when you're looking for your plants, find plants that want to grow in an understory and put those under trees instead of trying to get grass to grow. But yeah, certainly start small and don't pull the whole lawn out and think you're going to have a wildflower meadow in your front yard. It's not going to work that quickly, that easily.
John, you have anything?
You can. Yeah, I was going to say you can at least stop treating your lawn. A lot of homeowners just think that they have to fertilize, that they have to put down chemicals to have a nice lawn. Plant some clover and throw some violet seeds out there and say, bad words to the lawn care company as they're going down the road, kind of thing. Don't do that. Don't pick fights with your neighbors. But the lawn is the biggest waste of resources in the United States, and we hear it all the time. We've all been kind of brainwashed into believing that we have to have this perfect weed-free lawn, and that's sad. And people have lawns for a reason. Your kids want to play volleyball outside, great. Have an area where they can play and run around outside. We want kids to be outside, but do you want them to be outside crawling through 2,4-D and some of these chemicals that people are putting on their lawns? I don't.
And out of sight, out of mind, one thing we haven't even touched on is water quality.
Yeah.
All these things do find their way back into your water source, which affects fish, everything. If we were to all take that stance and stop using or cutting down drastically on those types of chemicals, you'd see a difference in your water quality.
It's important, especially if you live in a place that has a sewer system with storm drains. It's important to think basically your lawn is only capable of attaining so much water per hour or per rain event. It gets to a point where it can't take anymore. So after it reaches that saturation point, everything is just going to roll off and go into your storm drains. And lawn in particular does not attain very much water at all. It tends to be compacted soil. The roots don't go very deep. There's nothing to slow that water down before it hits the ground. So basically everything you're putting on your lawn, whether it's fertilizer, pesticides, or even just your dog going outside to use the bathroom, is a lot of that is going into your storm drains and affecting water quality somewhere downstream. But John, I do want to take a step back, because I think I've seen you speak 2 or 3 times now, and at one of your all of your presentations, you've mentioned a job that you had where it was a development and they had these big backyards that were all lawn and no one really went outside. And then you had your job there and you planted, I think it was butterfly weed and all these native plants. And then all of a sudden you had kids playing outside and there's people enjoying their backyard, having barbecues. And it didn't happen when it was just grass. It happened once there was native plants there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's actually a subdivision here in Northern Virginia called Ashburn Village. And it's a planned community, just like, many subdivisions are in the United States. And 5 or 6 years ago, they contacted us about doing pollinator habitat around their lakes. They have 5 man-made lakes in the subdivision. And they had previously talked to their landscaper, their mow and blow guy, for a lack of a better term, and they had done one lake, and they used the landscaper's dozen, miscanthus grass, knockout roses, mop cypresses, all the usual suspects, and it didn't really do anything for pollinator habitat, of course. And they asked me to go look at that lake first, and they said, we're just not getting good results and blah blah blah. And I went over there and I took pictures, because nobody went outside. Nobody went into their backyard. There wasn't a single patio built in the backyard. People had decks, but there was nothing on the decks. People just didn't go outside. There were Bradford pears, there were Eleagnus, it was just all the worst plants you could choose to put in a landscape. And so when we did our first garden there, we did Tippecanoe Lake, which went on to win what is called the Signatures of Loudon Design Award for public spaces. And it has a jogging trail that borders it. It borders the one side of a lake. It's probably 300-400 feet by 20 or 30 feet, and the story I like to tell is that somebody came out and saw the butterfly weed in bloom, and they said to me, hey, is that going to end up in my yard? And I said, well, I hope so, and then a year or two later, the same guy came back with his daughter, and his daughter was 6 or 7 years old, and she started telling me what that plant was. She said, do you know what this is? And I was like, when a kid is doing something like that to me, I play dumb. I just go, no, tell me, what is it? And so she's like, that's butterfly weed. And she told me the whole story of the monarchs flying south to Mexico for the winter, and that she was happy to have this plant in her backyard because that meant the monarchs were going to come back and that they were going to be in her backyard in the summertime, and that they could go visit her cousin in Mexico in the wintertime. And you know, it was just this really touching, rewarding story. And she had taken and planted some butterfly weed in her garden, and she actually took my hand and took me over to her house to show me the caterpillars on her plant. And I was just like, okay, nobody needs to pay me ever again. I'm just doing this job for free from now on, you know. And you know, it's been a real success story. But I would also caution you guys that when you're working with HOAs, to be mindful of the fact that administrations change. And unfortunately, Ashburn Village had a change in administration, and some people took it over who didn't care at all about the pollinator gardens. And I had to fight for 3 years to get them to keep them. You know, they were talking about plowing them under, putting them back into grass. They're still talking about that. And you know, I've challenged them with, you know, why are you thinking of doing this? Is this more expensive than regular landscaping? And they never give me a good reason why they want to do it, other than they just like grass. And you know, it's like, come on, man, you know, I had this whole magical moment and you're going to destroy it now. So you know, so good things and bad things have come from that garden. But we ended up doing 5 really large pollinator gardens, and like I said, they've become award-winning designs. And most of the, actually, when they started talking about getting rid of them, I got the people of Ashburn Village involved and said, hey, you know, you're about to lose these gardens. And so, you know, board meetings started to get bombarded by the citizens of the, you know, there's ways you can get around things if you get people involved.
Yep. I always found it to be a great story that I want to make sure we had you share it here.
That's a great story. Before we move on to the next question, would you like to share a newbie advice?
Oh, do I have?
Yeah.
I have advice.
Yeah.
Mine was really going to be.
I haven't asked you anything at all.
Mine was going to be start small, because like I alluded to, I started, hey, I just bought this house and I'm going to do everything native and pulled everything out, and yeah, I'm paying for it still. And once I have a free weekend, I'm going to be out there weeding and making sure I have everything cleaned up. So, but not yet.
My advice, and this has kind of been thrown back at me, you know, and I'll go through the positive and negative. If, you know, if you're not sure where to start, there's a lot of great resources. But if you have an open space near you, you know, go take a look. What do you see there? What are some of the native plants there? Now, I've also been, you know, it's been said to me, well, what is a native space now? Like, is it really a natural space? Like, can you even say? And that's true, because I can go to any natural space around here and find invasives at this point. But if you're opening your eyes just to look at, like, and you're asking questions and you're seeing what's there and you're asking the right questions, it gives you an idea. One thing we always talk about is wetland indicator status. That, you know, if you're looking at an open space near you and it's red maple and black gum and things like that, and you're like, all right, that's facultative. So maybe soil wise, it likes, you know, like somewhere in the middle, like, you know, it can maybe take a little wet. Sometimes it's found dry, that type of thing. It's just, it gets you at least asking the right questions of where to go from there. So it always helps just to kind of just take a look around and see what's in your area. Yeah. What's, you know, if there's a true, like, you know, hopefully you don't go to your local natural space and you're just seeing tree of heaven and and Russian olive. But
so one of the places we wanted to go with this was, and even with when you start talking about native plants, at least open yourself up to thinking about other things, not just what we enjoy, but what's good for birds and butterflies and wildlife. Are there any other garden applications that either just help bees and birds and wildlife, or even help us in other ways than eye appeal, that you guys use native plants in?
I could start. I mean, certainly green infrastructure. You know, I mean, this picture behind me is a rain garden, and over a time period of 5 years, that's going to, you know, infiltrate over 2 million gallons of water. So, you know, that's why we do green infrastructure, and that, you know, having native plants in there is obviously a key component. That's a multifaceted ecological home run right there.
Yeah. Anyone else?
This is going to sound really elementary, but the ecosystem services that native plants provide, clean air, pulling carbon out of the air, with your healthy soil, everything that, a kindergartner or first grader might learn in school about the importance of plants, clean water, clean air, just existence, human existence, quality of life on our planet comes from having healthy landscapes, and it's all connected ecologically, and native plants are, a really important component of that ecological integrity.
Anything else? Anyone else?
I'll follow up with Rich. We do a lot of rain gardens, and I actually just got my CBLP, which is certified, or Chesapeake Bay Landscaping Professional certification. And here in Virginia, we have what's called the VCAP program, the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, that helps homeowners install rain gardens and do conservation landscaping. And we had Beth Ginter on our show, who's the head of that program. And it was great because I said to her, can you quantitate, the stuff? And man, she gave off and they're all conservative numbers because, like they only require you to report that you did one rain garden. Well, we probably did 30 last year, and so whatever those numbers are that they're saying, and they've got them on their website, the gallons of water that they're cleaning, the nutrients that they're pulling from the soil, all those things are on there, and they're all incredibly important. And that's just the water going through the garden. And then, as Becky's saying, there's all the ecological, services that they're performing with being habitat. So, conservation landscaping and rain gardens to me are a huge thing of the future, because more and more municipalities are requiring it when you do construction. Instead of the old concrete ditch that goes through the riprap, we now have what we see behind Rich there, which is a beautiful lush landscape.
And it took a long way for us to get to that point, because like you talked about 60s way of thinking as far as gardens. It was that civil engineering form of let's get rid of the water as quickly as possible, and all the erosion that it caused and everything. It's just starting to, you'd think we'd be further along, but it's you're really just starting to see those. I think Ocean County did a lot of retrofitting of detention basins into rain gardens a few years ago, probably like 8-10 years ago, maybe. So I love that we're on that path, at least that you're seeing those changes. It's more normal to see those changes.
I have a confession.
Yes.
This is a confession of the soil district in general, soil conservation districts in general, and I guess of our government. In our office, we have an enormous library of literature that, over the years would be handed out, educational materials, and you'd be surprised of how many invasive species, we didn't know it then, how many invasive species we actually recommended for erosion control or, restoration practices. So unfortunately, we had a hand, I'm going to say all of us had a hand in kind of scrambling the egg here. So it really does, behoove us to kind of try to unscramble the egg and move forward with kind of reversing those old beliefs of what we should plant and educate properly.
The thing is, we've all made mistakes, and I'm sure there's things that we're doing now that we're going to find out years from now maybe we could have done better. The whole thing is learning from those mistakes, and that's actually like a good segue to where we want to go with this. If you're gardening in your yard and you want to start with natives, you're going to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. You're going to make a mistake. That's how you learn some of your most valuable lessons. Sorry, I'm smiling because I almost made a really bad joke and I actually bit my lip and didn't make it.
That's good.
So
you're becoming a little more professional.
Wow, how do you like that? I didn't have to cut it out. So what are some of the more valuable lessons that you've learned along your way in doing what you're doing, positive or negative, that you can pass along your experience of doing this?
don't impulse buy. Kind of like don't shop when you're hungry. Don't shop until you have your native plant list with you and you're bringing it with you to the nursery. Otherwise, you're going to see it. I will see a beautiful plant and go, oh wow, I love that plant. Resist the temptation and get a plan together.
Okay. All right. I like that. Anyone, come on, there's mistakes in there just waiting to come out.
Well, I guess,
from a designer's.
Oh,
go ahead,
John. Sorry. No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I think from a designer standpoint, you want to be peed out off on your first try, and so you go with the fanciest, newest cultivar or plant that hits the market kind of thing, and you end up replacing a lot of plants if you're a designer and you have to warranty your plants and those kinds of things. And so I kind of tell people to go first with the tried and true and the plants that have been in the trade for a long time, and if you put a button bush out there, it's going to grow a certain way and a certain size. If you put a crazy cultivar of it that does weird things, it might die in a year or two. So keep it simple.
Perfect example of a cultivar. There was a Coreopsis called Lime Rock Ruby that everyone loved. It was a hot new perennial. And then in the Northeast, they quickly learned after the first winter that it wasn't winter hardy. And most of them died over like a heavy Northeast winter. So, and that was something that they weren't counting on happening, but it happened. So, but if you just went with a Coreopsis that's native to the area, it's going to handle those conditions. So,
and Rick, you had something to add too, right?
Yeah, I think both points are great, and I think patience and being observant also. Mother Nature's going to tell you where something wants to grow. So, to the point I think John made earlier about looking around, and if it was Becky, I'm sorry, about looking around other, landscapes, what's surrounding you. I mean, you're going to minimize mistakes if you see other native plants or things like that in your developments. And also, like I said, have some patience. Things may not work out. You're going to make mistakes, like you're saying. And when you see those mistakes, go back and find out what they were. Don't just ignore them. Be observant. See were the leaves flagging? Was there a pest? Was it getting too much sun? Was it getting too much shade? All those things that you can eliminate by making sure that plant's going to be in the right spot.
Yeah. Awesome. To the tune of patience, I'll add in one of my favorite phrases. You hear it mostly in the native seed industry is first they sleep, then they creep, then they leap. And it's just, especially when starting stuff from seed, it takes a little while. I think we might have even said before, but some of the Baptisias from seed, they'll take like 7 years to really show up in a meadow seeding. If you plug it or you use it from a larger size container, it'll show up a lot faster than that, obviously. But some of this stuff takes time, and it will change over time as the plants interact with each other. But
and I'll throw one out there too. Just you want to look around. You also want to do your research. Just because something has been here for a long time, and you find it all over, doesn't necessarily make it native. Royal Empress tree is a great one in Philadelphia. There's a lot of wonderful old specimens. That was actually the seed pods were used as packing material for ships coming in from China. So, and that's how they kind of got here, and they've been here for a long time, but they're not necessarily native to here. So do a little research.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yeah.
It's somewhat of a rhetorical question, and it may be a rabbit hole, and it may be a conversation for a different day. And this might be the debate that you are hoping us all to have, and just agreement. And it kind of links back to what we didn't know earlier, and we scrambled the egg, and how should we move forward in the future? And it's regarding cultivars. There's a lot of talk about cultivars or nativars, and creating a plant with a different leaf color, different double blooms, and can insects engage with the flower and pollinate it, or is it actual food anymore for the caterpillar that needs to eat it? And should we continue to grow cultivars or nativars and end up in another 30 years with a whole bunch of plants that we've scrambled the egg in a different way? Or how do we approach that And again, this is probably a conversation for a whole nother pod.
I think this is a whole rooted discussion.
This is actually another episode we were hoping to have at some point.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know. Do we want to delve into this one? Because I'm afraid it might really. Maybe we can each give our like a 1 minute summary of what we think.
Yeah, and then we are running a little bit short on time, so let's everyone kind of give your spiel on how you feel about it.
And Tom and I will also.
And then we'll start to wrap up after that, just because we're getting close to 2 hours.
I have one question I want to ask.
Yeah.
I do. Actually, we're about an hour and 40 minutes.
Okay. So
all right.
Okay, so I could just jump in then. So first of all, the term nativar is like Fran and Tom knows, like nails on a chalkboard to me. It drives me bananas. I can't stand it. And the fact that who was it? Who actually, I think it was Alan Armitage coined the term nativar. And I certainly wish he hadn't. But anyway, I would like to, as far as like nativars, cultivars, we prefer to use species as much as possible. But I think if you're looking to get people involved, I think cultivars are okay. But I think from a professional standpoint, I think you always want to err on the side of species. I mean, that's my take anyway.
You brought up Dr. Alan Armitage, and he was on our show, and to him, it's all about marketing horticulture. And so his point, which I think is a legitimate one, is that you need to reach some people. And so this whole term nativar does that. It kind of differentiates native plants from other cultivars of other types of plants. And so I don't necessarily think it's a horrible thing to use or anything. I agree that we should always err on the side of straight species. But again, we're gardeners, we're human beings. We have cultivated plants for millions of years, or hundreds of thousands of years, sorry. And we're going to continue to do that. People are going to select a yellow flowering butterfly weed and call it mellow yellow, and they're going to put it out there on the market, and they're going to reach some people by doing that. And so I'm not against reaching some people and getting them interested in native plants. And maybe they start with a nativar, and then a year or two later, they start going, well, gosh, I'm going to get a little pickier about my plant palette, and I'm just going to go to straight species. So I think it's a gateway drug, so to speak. And we had Doug Talmy on the show too, and he said he had a really good point. He's like, that's great that we use this term, but why not put the straight species plant for sale beside it and give the consumer the choice? You can go with a cultivar, you can go with the straight species plant.
Who would like to go next?
Becky, are you going to answer your own question?
Yeah.
I'm on the fence, to be honest, right now, just because I feel like I want to be responsible for creating a world that is, I love the earth, as I'm sure all you do too, but I want to try to do my best to create my garden that is completely 100%. That'll never happen, but as ecologically responsible as possible, I guess. And even though, cultivars, like there's just some beautiful pink sweet pepper bush and, just these gorgeous native cultivars. I just don't know. I'm not comfortable yet with the science if that plant is going to eventually, be released, ecologically released into the environment and take over the natives. I don't know. It's such a big conversation to have, but I'll just say I'm on the fence right now. And me personally, I'm going to purchase straight species whenever I possibly can. And that's all I have to say about that.
Do you like
so? I really don't think there's a lot of debate happening, at least within our group we have here. And I kind of agree with what everyone has kind of said before, is it's if that can get someone from planting something that's exotic or definitely something that's invasive and have them plant something that is at least relatively native, that's a win. The more people we convince to come to our side of the argument, the better. And we can all have to hold ourselves to our own individual standard. And like Becky, I'm very similar to you when I'm gardening. So, and some of this is just because I have it available to me very easily. But I tend to use, well, I only use the straight species in my garden. And part of it for me is just the guilt of, well, I could plant this, or I could plant this thing that could be better. And that's why I do it. But like I said, if someone else, they really like that mellow yellow butterfly weed, well, I'm all for it. If that can get you there, and then that's going to say, well, what else native things can I plant? And then you just start adding to that list. That's a win.
All right. So I'm afraid I may ruffle some feathers with this one. I'm going to try to say it as politically correct as I can. And I agree. Everyone has their own standard. You can't you can control what you do, but you can't control what everyone else does. So if you choose to be a vegan, you can't expect that everyone else is going to be a vegan. You can make an argument or make a case or present evidence or facts. And I kind of feel like many of you do that right now it's a necessary evil, and that if it gets people involved, that maybe this is something that we realize is a mistake 10 years, 20 years down the road, that maybe we can move away from this now, but it got more awareness to it, and we can move more towards straight species. There was a just a final thought. There was a professor at Del Val University, Doug Keene, who passed away recently, and his argument was a lot of these cultivars are genetic glitches that are somewhat genetically inferior. There was an issue. What do you call the deer that are half white?
Oh, piebald.
Piebald. Maybe it's a genetic issue that we're kind of cloning and exploiting, but it's not necessarily as sound as the straight species. So it's, I think if you have native stands of straight species, you'll get the genetic diversity, and you'll get those naturally through there, and you get to enjoy it as they come and as they go. But that's my thought.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point as well. So, and that's a good teaser for the next time.
Yes,
we're gonna have a whole hour and a half episode of that at some point. We just got to find the right people to do it that aren't going to be at each other's throats.
I don't know that I may let you do that one.
Yeah.
I may choose to. I got to do one without you, not by choice, but maybe that's one you do it.
And Fran, you said you had a question you had to ask.
Well, just because we talked about the plants, the soil, and all these things. And even though a home gardener may have these things, they may struggle with the design aspect of how it should really look, because they don't have that design experience. Where do you go for that inspiration when you're doing design work? What are some of the things that you do to help with that aesthetic? Anyone?
That is a really good question, and a question that I'm asked a lot working with home gardeners. And to be honest, I go to other people's yards and see what they've done, with their landscaping. I want to say, I take a walk in the woods, but, building on what John said, we live in a temperate area. We live in the eastern deciduous forest region, and our native habitat ecosystem does not, our yards do not mimic that exactly. It's just impossible. I'd have just a yard full of pine trees in my backyard if that were the case. So, I go to places, like Pat Sutton's backyard, or other, native plant gurus that have excellent backyards already established, and get ideas from them.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Yesterday,
they have amazing gardens in their own yards, I'm guessing. I'm going to come to your yard.
Yesterday, I was down in Alexandria, Virginia, and I think most of my inspiration comes from nature, and so I would say I go hiking Appalachian Trail, that kind of stuff, to look for inspiration. But I was down in Alexandria yesterday, and my wife has been asking me to get her Ethiopian food for the past 20 years. And as I left this client's house, I looked across the street and there's an Ethiopian restaurant. So I went in, ordered some food. And while they were cooking it, I walked around the block And, you know, you're talking about Old Town Alexandria, back to the 1700s, these little townhouses, these little row homes, 10 by 15 front yards, and everybody's is on display. You know, it was a garden tour that was free of charge. And I just went from place to place. And, you know, one of the hardest things you can do is design a really tiny little place. And so I just was going along, and, you know, we all have cameras with us these days because we all have our phone, and everybody's phone has a camera on it. And so anytime I came across a garden that I thought was special, I just would, you know, take some pictures of what I thought was special about it. And I came home, and, you know, if you go to the My Documents folder on my computer, you'll see a folder that says ideas, and I download them to that. And, you know, they're going to be with me forever now. But it was a completely unplanned, completely unexpected, great little garden tour that I took yesterday.
Awesome. So I know time-wise we need to wrap it up. Tom, do you think
You didn't want to ask Rick? You want to cut him out? Oh man,
Richard, I'm sorry.
He's never gonna come back. So Rick, where do you go for inspiration?
Well, you could have skipped me because I don't have a whole lot. So
yeah, I was trying to save.
Yeah, thanks. It probably would have been better if you just skipped.
I'll pull you back in.
You know, I'll just, you know, a lot of stuff I'll look at. What I'll do when I'm really stuck is I'll look at Doug Talmey's work, and I'll go to see how many caterpillars that are on his list and see what I can add to the ecology, and go by his list if I'm going to add something.
You can't go wrong with any of those. What I was going to say was I kind of feel like everyone's talked about some of their favorite plants instead of torturing them with making everyone pick a native plant. I kind of feel like we've already tortured them enough with that. Do you want to just go right to final thoughts?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Unless you guys want to add your favorite plant to your final thought, but
if you know, you could do that. If you want to say what your favorite native plant is, I know that's always a hard one to do, especially because we've discussed so many things. But we always, you know, this is the time of the show where we always just give everyone a final thought. You can promote anything you want to promote. You can just summarize, or you can bring up something that maybe we didn't touch on, and the floor is yours for however long you want it until you're done talking. So, and Becky, let's start with you.
All right. So final thoughts. Take some time to make a plan and determine the function and the purpose of your yard or garden or landscape, and start with healthy soil. Either get to know your soil intimately by, you know, smell, touch, roll around in it, or get a soil test done professionally, and visit the Jersey Friendly Yards plant database to pick out the right plant for the right place. And John started with mentioning inkberry holly, and that is definitely one of my favorite plants, and I want to promote shrubs because I think they're overlooked in the backyard landscape. So inkberry holly, Ilex glabra, feeds the birds.
Awesome.
Good choice.
Awesome. Richard, since I left you out last time, if you would like to go next.
Yeah, I can echo Becky's thoughts exactly. I think what she said is perfect. And also too, I think you guys are doing a great service to everybody. I think I've been listening to your podcast. I'm going to trick you guys a little bit since the get-go. And I think what you guys are doing is awesome. And the more people listen to you guys, you're knowledgeable. You go in deep with things. You skim the surface to people who don't understand it. I just think what you guys are doing is awesome. So
thank you.
You've got a loyal listener here, no doubt. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. John, what's your final thought?
I would say have fun in what you're doing. You know, if you're not having fun out in the garden, why are you doing it? So have fun while you're doing it, and don't be judgmental. Don't be afraid to fail, and don't do any finger wagging as you're out in the garden and looking at your neighbor who's planting something that's not native. You know, focus on you, and you'll be okay. Favorite plant? Like Becky, I'm going to push a shrub. You know, we've mentioned Dr. Talmy a few times, and he talks about the super genera, you know, those that are the biggest supporters of life, and I'm going to go with Carolina allspice,
Ooh.
Calacanthus floridus.
Yeah.
Does that grow in New Jersey? I
Uh,
guess.
You know what? It's not native here, but I know when I
Right.
worked at Princeton, we grew it. It's fine. It grows here fine. Like you definitely use it, and that's a
I
fantastic.
think there's one in my parents' backyard.
Yeah, I
'Cause
think
I-
there is too.
I'll even just throw that into my final thought. That was one of the episodes I listened to when I was doing some yard work and gardening last summer, of the Native Plant podcast. And we talked about resources earlier. You have a great resource in Jersey Friendly Yards with Becky and Karen and everything they're doing over there. Rick has his website, ecologymatters.net. It has a lot of good information on there. And if you're looking for inspiration of garden design, that's just a good place to look at some of the projects they've done. And you can look at the pictures and see, well, this is some of the aesthetic that you can get out of using native plants. And then I'm sure, John, on your website, I've looked at the same stuff where you can look at the pictures. But in addition, make sure if you are listening to the podcast, don't just listen to ours, listen to John's as well.
Yes.
The Native Plant podcast is one of the reasons that we started doing what we were doing.
Definitely. It's a complete inspiration.
And I've had a lot of friends that go on there, and a lot of people I'd like to meet that I've listened to on there. And I'm glad you guys are back for another season, so I can get out in the garden and do some yard work and have my earbuds in and kind of drift off. I feel like this is the part of the podcast where I should be cracking a beer and telling you about my dog, though.
Well, we can do that. Thank you guys for doing what you're doing, because it takes some of the pressure off of me. You know, when I got started, we were kind of the only native plant oriented podcast out there, so I'm glad some other people are getting into it. And I started out this season by saying that this may be our last one, because you know, you get Dr. Talamy on every podcast, and you get a lot of the same guests, and that's okay. But I don't, I've done it for a while. I'm ready to take a break.
And that's definitely a difficult part of this when you get someone like Dr. Talamy, you're like, all right, what am I going to ask him that hasn't been asked? And it's definitely you start feeling pressure, and you remember, part of this is a labor of love, and you're doing it, you're having fun doing it. And I'm glad you said that. Like, if you're not having fun, then it's not really worth doing anymore. But was that your final thought?
That was my final thought. Yeah.
So I guess mine, to summarize, I hope that everyone here, their words have inspired you to, if you haven't planted native plants, to do a little more research and plant some in your gardens. I think a great source of inspiration for me, if anything, more than, well, I guess they are words, they're just not our words, is Robin Wall Kimmerer with the book Braiding Sweetgrass, as far as finding that connection and what it means to you. It's all these things that we talked about. It's planting the right thing. It's good for the ecology. It's great for the pollinators. But spiritually and deep down, how do you connect with it? How do you connect with all these things that you're bringing to the garden? And how does that make you feel? And it's a great way to just put yourself in the right mind space to take that next step. So if you haven't read that book, it's a real life changer for me. Pick it up. That's someone we'd love to have on the podcast and talk.
Oh yeah.
That would be about as deep as it as you could get. But that's
Good
really
luck.
my kind of thought. Yeah.
We've
been trying for years.
Yep. Yeah. So I've sent an email and haven't heard anything back yet, but we'll just have to be persistent.
Yeah, and that's okay. You know what? I'm fine with what she's already said has been wonderful, and if it can inspire another person to take that leap and take that next step, it's you can't really ask for much more than that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better that she doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better that that's
there,
yeah. Maybe it's that perfect form that's put down, and it can't be tainted.
So, well, that wraps it up for today. Thank you guys for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who's listening. We hope you enjoyed listening to us on this episode of Rooted Discussions of Native Plants Healthy Planet. Make sure you visit our website, nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. We're going to put all the links to all their organizations up there, so you can find John's podcast and Jersey Friendly Yards and all the stuff that Rick is doing. You'll be able to find it right on our website. Again, this is Native Plants Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
as always, we're going to give a huge thank you to RJ Comer for contributing the theme music to Rooted Discussions, as well as our Buzz episodes. Make sure you listen to RJ's music on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you consume music. There's a lot of great stuff. Follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, and YouTube on our custom URL, Pinelands Nursery. Don't forget, we have the question and answer line, question and comment line. We've been getting some great questions, and Saul has been coming back. We're worried that he hadn't called in a while, but he's calling back again. You can call us at 215-346-6189. I will repeat that, 215-346-6189. Ask a question or leave a comment. If we pick your question or comment, we'll play it and answer it on a future episode of The Buzz. Let's not forget about the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. That keeps growing. Every time I look, we have 10 or 20 more members, and the conversation's been great and also very inclusive, which I appreciate. So keep the conversation going over there.
Yeah. You can listen to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast directly at www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. You can also check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, really wherever you consume your podcast. Is there anywhere that we aren't on?
No,
I think you can find us anywhere.
Pandora, Audible, like all of them, so pretty much.
When you're there, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. And the best thing you do is share this with a friend. We keep saying we want to make this circle bigger, not just our circle, but the native plant circle. And that's one way that you can do it that we really appreciate. So with that, thanks everyone. I'm Tom.
Did you almost say you were Fran again?
No, I almost just said hi, bye everyone.
Bye, see you later.
Thanks everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. Richard, John, and Becky, thank you all so much for taking this much time out of your day today. It's always a pleasure getting to spend time with you, especially in times of COVID where we don't get out to conferences and trade shows and get to see each other face to face. So thank you so much for taking your time today.
Thank you. It's been a blast. Thanks so much.
Anytime. Coming up next, we have a Buzz episode, and it's the 4th in our series, and it will be trees.
Yep.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Excited to talk about trees.
We are. Until then, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.